Sean Deveney over at sportingnews.com, their NBA writer, is debunking the biggest myths about what the Warriors have done to the NBA. Sean, welcome back. As a lot of people are looking at this Warriors team, I talked about it the other day, well, they could be like the Lakers starting in 80, where they went to the championship 9 out of 11 years. I mean, they might not win 11 straight times, but it's hard to believe that anyone is going to compete with this Warriors team. So, I don't know. Do you see more teams going down this super team road?
I think there are teams that would like to, but that's not because of the Warriors. That's because that's what teams have always tried to do. You know, you go back to the Lakers with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor and then making trade for Wilt Chamberlain. You know, teams have always tried to bring together three superstars and say, okay, this is how we're going to approach it. So, you know, the fact that the Warriors have 4 stars does put them a little bit ahead of everybody else, but I don't think it changes anything. I've heard that, well, now everybody's going to try to do this. Well, no, they've always tried to do that. And I think the other thing is the luxury tax is you know, the reason that the Warriors were able to do what they did was because of a quirk in the TV deal that allowed them to fit Kevin Durant under a spiking cap. Now we're going to have one more spike in the cap this summer. It's not going to be it's not going to have the same impact as when Durant was a free agent. But after that, we're not going to have that spike anymore. So it's going to be much tougher to do this sort of thing. So you know, I think the notion that that other teams are going to be chasing the Warriors by trying to slap together super teams, it's going to get much tougher to do.
Sean, the other day, Luke Walton kind of said, yeah, with them right now, take your time. Your myth number 2 is this team will encourage everyone else to give up. It sounds like Luke Walton's on board with that myth. We've seen other teams here in our market. Obviously, Philadelphia did not really care about how much they won over the last couple of years. Do you think more teams will look at Philadelphia and say, you know what, I like what they've done the last couple of years. We're not catching the Warriors. Let's go down that road.
Well, you know, I think you have to put what Luke said into context. And he said, you know, we've got these young assets. We're not one player away from going out and becoming a team that can compete with the Warriors. And if you're in that position, then I think that, yeah, you do sort of say, all right, let's try to rebuild. And that's probably a good idea for the Lakers to do that. But I think, you know, a team like Boston, for instance, they're going to be aggressive this summer, and they don't care that the Cavaliers are where they are, or that the Warriors are where they are. They're going to try to get Gordon Hayward. They're going to use the number 1 pick. They're going to possibly have a number 1 pick next year. So, you know, a team like that is going to strike while the iron is hot. You know, San Antonio, I don't think they're going to roll over. Certainly if they could get Chris Paul, you know, if they could find a way to finagle the room where they could possibly sign Chris Paul, they're going to do it. So, yeah, you know, I again, you know, I think you can kind of look at some teams and say, all right, well, they're doing this because of what the Warriors are, what the Cavaliers are. I just don't think that that's necessarily true, just because you know, they're going to continue to build the way they probably would have built even if these teams didn't exist.
Sean Deveney's with us talking about the Golden State Warriors and the dominance and what they've done. And he's got a great article right now on sportingnews.com about debunking the biggest myths about the Warriors and what they've done. And Sean, your myth number 3 is that the Warriors' dominance is going to go unchecked for the next 4 or 5 years.
You know, you mentioned the Lakers of the 80s. And one reason that they were able to maintain such a high level, you got to remember that was you know, almost 40 years ago now. The cap was different. You know, the financial situation was different, and I think that really did allow that to flourish in a way that you can't really do it in this day and age. I think the more relevant is say, Kobe and Shaq in the early 2000s, or the Miami Heat in 2010, where those teams came together and everybody said, oh, geez, that's it. They're gonna, they're gonna win for the next. They'll be the teams that'll be winning for the next 10 years, and that didn't quite work out. Kobe and Shaq, the egos got to be too much, and with the Heat, you had some ego, you had some sort of dissension in the ranks, that sort of thing. As good as everything looks for the Warriors right now, I've seen it too many times where eventually these things fall apart. And if it's not in terms of the internal chemistry, then I would expect it to be something to do with the fact that it's just really hard to pay all these guys with the luxury tax that you have to pay. So one way or the other, I think we'll see the Warriors begin to show some chinks in the armor as we go forward.
So if this core four stays together, though, Sean, how long can they stay at the top in the event they don't break up?
Yeah, like you say, I think other teams will continue to get better, and they'll be the gold standard. But I think other teams will continue to chase them and close the gap. I think their ability, certainly one thing the luxury tax does is okay, you've got those four guys and you're paying them, but it becomes really hard for you to bring in other players. So if you're dealing with the situation where you've got four guys and then you have a bunch of guys on minimum contracts, you're going to have a problem, especially somebody gets hurt, something like that. So, I think if you keep these four guys together, obviously they can be near the top of the league for the next, you'd have to say 5 years at least. But I would expect other teams to close the gap, and I would expect there to be, circumstances that would eventually cause the Warriors, like I say, to cause that gap to close as we go forward.
It almost seems, Sean, like this year's finals were predetermined, and already people are asking, what do I have to look forward to next year if the gap is this wide? Is the regular season in trouble?
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. I think that's something that fans are going to be frustrated by. But I think also when you look at the regular season and if you watch the regular season this year, it wasn't always about the Warriors. It was about Russell Westbrook and the triple doubles. It was about James Harden and what Mike D'Antoni did with that team. You had plenty of storylines. I mean, one of my favorite things was watching Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee and see how he develops. I don't think anybody thinks the Sixers are going to compete with the Cavaliers in the East next year, but it sure will be fun to see if they can get everybody healthy and see what that team begins to look like. So I don't buy the notion that the regular season is becomes a waste just because we have two teams that are head and shoulders above everybody else. And don't forget, look, if San Antonio does make a move and bring in somebody like Chris Paul, things get a little tighter in the West, and certainly if Boston's able to do some things, then things could get tighter in the East as well.
Sean, we saw the Heat when they had LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Bosh. They had to squeeze guys onto their roster at veteran minimums. Can the Warriors entice veterans like LeBron was able to have those guys go to Miami for 4 years? I mean, LeBron's a little different dynamic than Draymond or Steph, but can they pull that off?
Yeah, well, I mean, to an extent they've done it. I mean, that you've seen David West in that scenario where he signed a veteran minimum. I'm not sure he would have gotten a whole lot more somewhere else, but he's an example, and certainly a team like Golden State, that's something that they've got to peddle. Is hey, we can't pay anything, but we can probably get you a ring. So that's what they're going to do. I think Cleveland needs to do that this summer as well. They can't just sit back and wait for the trade deadline to pass and sign guys like Bogut and Deron Williams like they did this year. I think they're going to have to be more aggressive in the summer. Going after, say, a guy like I think Tony Allen would be a good example of somebody who might be able to help them and willing to sign a veteran minimum deal for a chance at a championship.
Sporting News NBA writer Sean Deveney is with us here. I said yesterday, Sean, that we talk about super teams. You wrote about everyone's going to try to do it. I don't know that there is a collection of guys that are in their prime that could be put together. I think it's the next group. I kind of talked about it's like the Gen X's against the millennials. It's going to have to be like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and then Andrew Wiggins saying, I want to go play with those guys. Or maybe vice versa. Maybe Ben Simmons says, well, I want to go play with Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Wiggins. That seems like the kind of team that could finally take down one of the current two powers, because unlike the Jordan years, you just had the Bulls that the East couldn't get through. The West had a different kind of team coming through. But now you got one team in the East that no one can beat and one team in the West that no one can beat. The only way I really see those teams getting knocked off is that if the generation behind forms a super team.
I think that the next wave is probably not going to be a free agency situation, that it's going to be a draft situation. I think that's one reason why, like I say, you'd have to be interested in the Sixers this season, even if you know that they're not a legitimate contender or anything. You'll see sort of the beginnings of a possible contender, and you can say the same for Boston. Even if they go out and get Gordon Hayward and they've got Hayward and Horford and Isaiah Thomas, they'll have the number one pick this year. They'll have Markelle Fultz, and I think they really like what they saw from Jaylen Brown last year, and they potentially have another number one pick next year because they're going to have Brooklyn's pick then as well. So I think, as excited as you might be about the guys that the Celtics, the veterans the Celtics have on the roster, I think the real key to them becoming a challenger to Cleveland is going to be through the draft. So I agree with you that I don't think we're going to see any combination of free agents that are really going to provide teams that can actually knock off the Warriors or the Cavaliers, barring injury. Of course, that's always the asterisk. But I think it's going to come from some of these guys who have been drafted recently or will be drafted in the next couple of years.
Yeah, Sean, I guess for the listeners out there, because a lot of people just say, well, what if they get a free agent? I think a lot of people don't understand how much more difficult getting a free agent is than it was a couple of years ago.
And you see it over and over again. You see teams kind of lock themselves in, and you wind up with the big three, as they call it. That's just pretty good, but not good enough. Washington is a great example. I mean, they got their three guys through the draft. They'll overpay Otto Porter this summer most likely. Okay, now you've got the three guys who are taking up 75% of your cap, are John Wall, Bradley Beal, and Otto Porter. Is that good enough? And you've now used up all your cap space. Signing those guys. You could look at a team like Dallas, where you're going to have Wesley Matthews, and you're going to have Harrison Barnes, who they signed to the big deal last year, and they're probably going to give Nerlens Noel the big deal this summer. So, that's your big three. Is that going to be good enough? Of course not. So I think a lot of teams sometimes with free agents sort of dig themselves into a hole, feeling that they've got to do something, and you wind up hurting yourself long term.
Sean, Tim Legler told us yesterday that he thinks the Sixers could be the team that takes over for the Cavs 3 or 4 years down the road. Do you agree?
I do, yeah. I mean, like I say, a lot of it is going to have to do with health, obviously, but that talent level, no question, is there, and I think that when you look at what they have in place. If that develops the way, and it's a big if, but if they can develop that the way it looks like what the ceiling is for those guys, then you'd have to say that they're a team that could be a contender going forward, and is probably going to be one that when LeBron starts to decline is going to be ready to make the move up. And I put the Celtics sort of in that same category. Again, not so much because of Al Horford and Isaiah Thomas, but more because of Jaylen Brown, the number one pick this year, and potentially the number one pick next year.
But if it takes 3 to 4 more years, was it all worth it for the Sixers?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a debate that we're always going to have, and because Hinkie's not around, we'll never get the true notion of what he would have done with all this stuff. But certainly, look, yeah, if you can escape that area where you're winning 45 games and you're just pretty good, and get into the area where you're winning 60 games, you got a chance at a championship. I think the years of suffering will eventually prove to be worth it.
Sean Deveney over at Sporting News. Check him out at sportingnews.com, debunking the myths of the dominance of this Warriors team. And, of course, Sean, we have the offseason to look forward to now in the NBA, the draft coming up on June 22nd. So hopefully we'll be catching up with you very soon.
All right, Mike, thanks.